Hi, all. Welcome to Overruled with Jonathan Goldberg, KC, one of the UK's most highly regarded criminal defense lawyers. He's defended over 100 murder cases and worked with numerous high profile clients over the years. Today, I, Kinsey Schofield, you, the audience, we're going to pick his brain. And going forward, we're going to pick his brain about some of the most fascinating cases all over the world. And Jonathan, there's no case bigger right now than Jeffrey Epstein, just in general. It's like actually my friend Barry, my friend Barry Levin wrote a book called The Spider, and it's about Jeffrey Epstein, and it's just basically about this web. And what a great way to describe the Jeffrey Epstein chaos, because today we're going to talk about so many different aspects of Jeffrey Epstein's mess, this havoc he's absolutely wreaked. And I think it would be silly not to start with the fact that Pam Bondi is subpoenaed by the U.S. House in the Jeffrey Epstein investigation. Are they accusing the Trump administration or Pam Bondi in general of hiding anything?
Well, I suspect that's going to be the thrust of it when she eventually appears. And probably it will split along party lines. The Democrats will accuse her of hiding any involvement by Trump, and the Republicans will say she hasn't done. It's such a three-ring circus, these hearings. But I don't know if you saw the Clintons a couple of days ago. And to me, that was wonderful, wonderful stuff because they treated their questioners like Mike Tyson having a boxing match with a 13-year-old school champion. Seems to me they just wiped the floor with them. You had Hillary, who was shouting and aggressive and strident, just as they were to her, but she gave better than she got. And you had Bill, who was laughing it off, relaxed, enjoying himself. Really a vintage performance, I thought, from the Clintons. I thought the committee didn't lay a glove on them, either of them.
That's a very good point. Let's just get some of the backstory there, because the Clintons did ignore their subpoena initially, and it wasn't until they were threatened that they finally broke down and agreed to have this conversation. But they gave hours of sworn depositions behind closed doors last week that were later released on video for the public to see. In fact, Hillary argued that the media should have been allowed in there. She wanted more transparency, allegedly. In his testimony, Bill Clinton described his relationship with Epstein as cordial but distanced, saying he flew on Epstein's plane for humanitarian work through the Clinton Foundation and denied ever witnessing any of Epstein's criminal behavior, emphasizing he cut ties long before Epstein's 2008 conviction. People might moan and groan at that, having seen how Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor claimed the same thing, but of tangible evidence, we haven't seen that Bill Clinton maintained a relationship in comparison to Andrew, where we can clearly see that Andrew maintained that relationship. Hillary repeatedly denied ever meeting Epstein. She said she had no knowledge of his crimes and pushed back at committee Republicans, calling parts of their inquiry partisan. The release of the 9+ hours of footage marks a rare moment in the investigation as lawmakers seek accountability, at least stateside, and clarity about the extent of prominent figures connected to Epstein and his network. I will agree with you that my favorite part of the 9 hours of footage, and I don't know if this reflects poorly on me or not, is when Bill Clinton, is like giggling and admiring some of the pages and pictures related to his relationship with Epstein. His attorney tries to remove it from his hands because she can tell that physically it's not the right approach. Physically, it's not the right reaction. It's like he's looking at a photo album that he's like loving, and his attorney's like, please don't, please don't. And he takes it back from her, Jonathan.
His attorneys were protecting him when, frankly, he needed no protection at all. It was a classic case. I always say when I'm in court, do not object, do not object, do not get up and object, because it looks terrible for a jury when you do. It's counterproductive. and too many advocates ignore that. But Clinton, he needed no protection at all. He was so much master of his brief, and he was obviously enjoying himself to be back in the limelight. I do advise our viewers to watch this on YouTube because it's the best free show in town.
So you, from a public perception perspective, it didn't make you nervous at all that his behavior might come off as inappropriate to people that are very upset with the way that America is responding to the Epstein files. Like here we are finally seeing some American authority held accountable for their relationship with this despicable man. And it feels like Bill Clinton is not respecting the tone or reading the room. Do you do you understand why some people, I mean, I got a chuckle out of it inappropriately, but do you understand why some people might be annoyed with him looking so carefree in that moment?
Truthfully, Kinsey, you had from Hillary and from Bill the two ways to deal with allegations made against you. So if somebody says, Kinsey, you're a murderess, and you've got two ways of dealing with it, haven't you? You either say, outrageous, how dare you, and lose your temper and become all aerated as an innocent person would or should, perhaps. There's that way. And that was Hillary. That was entirely what she did. And then you've got the other way, which is to laugh it off. Oh, don't be so ridiculous. Are you joking? Oh, come on. And that was Bill's method. So you had the two opposite poles of how to deal with allegations. Look, candidly, I suspect, and many may suspect, that they're probably both lying in their teeth. But I'm saying they made a magnificent job of it.
I know. I mean you're right because we saw two very different reactions. And with Bill's reaction, what was your response to his answer about the photograph of him in the jacuzzi? Because that was probably one of the most damning pieces of evidence from a public perception um, point of view. Like, okay, you can say that you only engaged with this person through your charity, but how does a hot tub or a swimming pool enter the picture there?
Do you just want to remind our audience what he said about it? And then I'll
Mm-hmm.
give you my comment.
He said that he was told by the host to try out the jacuzzi. Like, hey, why don't you just jump in there? I don't, if it requires a bathing suit, Jonathan, I might hesitate. I don't care how much I like the host. If it requires me getting in a bikini, I'm gonna opt out.
But on the other hand, you see, you can see his point. Look how often one does go in a jacuzzi with friends, perhaps a glass of wine. I've had some very enjoyable evenings in California, where you are, when I was younger, in just that way. So again, if you get all aerated and deny it, they'll say, oh, the lady doth protest too much, won't they? But if you just laugh it off, well, casual, a new friend, beautiful new home, why not?
Mm,
So that was his way of dealing with it.
yeah.
But suffice it to say that no one proved a single lie against either of them. They came out unscathed, you must admit that. Two old professionals, I thought they gave a masterclass in how to deal with allegations, be they true or false. They gave a masterclass in how to deal with it.
I agree with you. I agree with you. And I think it's so frustrating when you see what's happening in the UK, or you can see some of the visual to your eyes. I mean, we live in a world where people watch CSI and they watch these 45-minute long programs where there's DNA evidence or there's some sort of tangible proof. And in the United States, and correct me if I'm wrong, I have yet to see the kind of hard hitting evidence that we do see against certain individuals in the UK. So while some are arguing that only these powerful men in the United Kingdom are being held accountable, I would suggest we haven't really seen evidence of anything yet through these specific DOJ dumps that can compare to what we've seen in the UK.
Do you know, I agree with you. I think it's been all quantity and no quality in America. But in Britain, if anything, it's been the other way around. You're thinking, of course, of Peter Mandelson, former ambassador to the US, Lord Mandelson, as he was. He's now stood down from the House of Lords in shame. And the former ex-Prince Andrew, now Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor. And in their case, it's quality, not quantity, because the emails that have emerged definitely suggest that both of them, in their respective roles, were leaking confidential information from secret government sources, really confidential and indeed price sensitive information that Epstein would have been able to make a killing with on the market. They were leaking it to him, and they were stupid enough to do it in emails, imagining, no doubt, that this would never surface. Trusting their friend Epstein, no doubt, but who was to know what would happen 10 years later? So there really does seem to be the evidence, and that's the reason that both Mandelson and the ex-prince have been arrested and are now being very vigorously investigated by two different police forces. And although it's going to take time, I would suggest many, many months before charges could be brought. But my educated guess is that there will be criminal charges
Wow. Well,
against
let's,
both of them.
I want to start because I think it's almost easier with Peter Mandelson, because the Times writes that in the UK, the fallout from this, it could take, I mean, I think you said months. They're suggesting that this could take more than a year. He was arrested in recent weeks on suspicion of misconduct in public office, linked to documents and emails disclosed in the US Department of Justice release of Epstein-related material, which you just said, allegations that he shared information with Epstein that inevitably, I think it's so much more damning for Mandelson because Epstein was paying his partner. And so it does feel like there are that's a transactional relationship more so than Andrew, which it seems like he was trading in 26-year-old Russians, but we'll get into that in a second. But
You know,
they,
Lindsay, forgive me, that's a currency too, you know.
oh, well, I like to assume that I'm worth more than that. But I did think it was interesting because the Times says that British police forces are hitting delays obtaining unredacted US files necessary for their investigation with both Mandelson and for Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, meaning the probes could extend deep into 2027 as investigators pursue mutual legal assistance and building evidence before any charges or prosecutions occur. And I don't know if you saw this headline a few weeks ago, but they re-redacted some of the Andrew emails. So if you hadn't, taken a screenshot when they were initially dropped, someone went back in there, re-redacted them. So it's not as easy as searching Andrew's name or searching some of the keywords or the email addresses we know that were previously used. So if the
I'll tell you what the reason is. The reason for that will be that the police don't want a future jury to be prejudiced by having read them already. So that's
oh
a legitimate investigation tool, I think.
wow, that's very interesting. And so when you think of the idea that this could take, more than a year, will the public accept that? I think in Mandelson's case, it's almost easier, but you have been in the UK recently. You saw the rise of conversations around abdication, around holding the royal family accountable. I don't even know how to put this, but I guess my point or my question is, are you concerned at all that an investigation would take so long when the pitchforks are out right now?
No, I'm afraid I'm not. And people are making too much of this point. I'll tell you why. I mean, for heaven's sake, I've been for more than a half century a defending lawyer in England. And so a typical time frame would be this for a heavy case. And this is a heavy case and an important case in each of the two cases, quite obviously. Well, let me give you a recent example from my own cases. So the the Hillsborough criminal trial, big disaster where 90 odd football supporters were killed when a stadium collapsed, and it was said to be the police's fault for not having done their job properly. I won't go further into the details. Well, the incident actually occurred in 1989, but the criminal trial the investigation started in 2017. This was exceptional, but nonetheless, the trial didn't get heard until 2021, 4 years later. I'm happy to say my client was acquitted at the end of a long jury trial. But the point being, for a difficult case, 3 years from investigation to trial is normal. 5 years is not abnormal. 7 years happens as well. So when the Times says, well, this will go into next year before there's a charge, well, so what? It's perfectly normal. Plus, at the moment, I'm afraid the English criminal justice system is pretty broken, and it's taking far longer than ever it used to get a trial on the road and to complete investigations, basically because the government's not putting enough funding into the system. That's a separate issue, and there's a great big controversy over it in Great Britain at the moment. But what I'm saying is, what they're making a fuss for, you can't. If they were to put Andrew and Mandelson on the front burner and ignore all their other cases that were ahead of them in the queue, well, there'd be a public outcry. Why are they getting priority? It's not fair to the victims of the other cases. So you can understand it's got to take its turn. And these things do very commonly take years to get investigated and eventually charged. So there's nothing unusual about it.
What is a lifestyle like for Peter Mandelson for the next few months, years, while he waits to see what happens? Is he free to go? You know, we understand he was arrested when he was because someone whispered in the police's ear that he was on the move, that he could be picking up and fleeing out of fear over this. So what's a lifestyle like for him going forward?
Do you know, what you've mentioned is a very interesting corner of the case in itself. So it turns out that the person who gave information to the police that he might be about to do a moonlight flit, in other words, that he might be about to flee the jurisdiction, of all people in the world, it was the Speaker of the House of Commons, Sir Lindsay Hoyle. And of course, it should never have emerged that anyone gives information to the police. There's an expectation of confidentiality for obvious reasons when you give information to the police. But by some cock-up, the police revealed that it was him, and he had to make a statement fessing up in the House of Commons just a few days ago. So what did he base his information on? The Speaker of the House of Commons. Nothing more than he'd been on holiday the week before in the British Virgin Islands, awfully nice place to be, on the beach, no doubt, and probably on some official visit, I imagine, to be more serious. But he'd heard there it was being suggested that Mandelson was on his way out there. Well, a more stupid place for Mandelson to try and flee, you cannot imagine, because obviously it's a British territory, and they would simply put him on a plane and send him straight back if he were wanted, or the police would simply go out there and arrest him and bring him back on the next plane. I mean, you don't flee from Britain to Britain if you're genuinely trying to flee. So it was an absurd piece of information for the Speaker of the House of Commons to have given. You almost have to wonder, was he being malicious to get the man arrested? Oh. You really have to wonder, don't you?
Wow.
I don't know the answer, quite obviously. But anyway, that's why Mandelson was arrested when he was. He could otherwise have hoped, to sit in his home and have an anxious wait for many months until the police knocked on the door, because they'd already taken all his papers with a search warrant. Mm-hmm. So that was Mandelson. Now, as regards Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, he was arrested out of the blue and taken to the police station, interviewed and bailed, we know, the same evening. Seems a bit unfair, because any other white-collar criminal, shall we call him that, with good character, never having been in trouble before, you would expect the police to phone his solicitor and say, we want to interview him. Let's make a convenient date and time when you will attend at a police station of our choice, convenient to both of us. That's what would normally happen. And I don't know why they didn't do the same thing that happened with Mandelson, take a search warrant so they could go and get his papers straight away, and he wouldn't have a chance to shred them or throw them away or anything of that kind, because that's a legitimate concern, quite obviously, that the police would have. But having done that, there's no need to arrest him. They could have taken their time. And I suspect that the real reason is the tremendous public outcry and lust for blood. The public were demanding action. It was a sort of witch hunt, if you like. Whether he's guilty or innocent, it was nonetheless, people wanted blood, and the police responded and gave it to them.
Do you wonder at all if the reason that they pursued Andrew the way they did was because it was released all of the sudden that he was moving homes, because he initially wasn't supposed to leave Frogmore Cottage until Easter, and suddenly, out of the dead of night, we found out that King Charles had kicked him out of Frogmore Cottage, put him on a private jet, shipped him off to Sandringham. He was in a home in Sandringham that is not his permanent setup. It's just his temporary home until his is renovated. But it just shows you the sense of urgency that the palace was in to get him off the Windsor property. And perhaps the investigators, because keep in mind, there are 9 or 10 different people investigating Andrew, and it's not just about this government secrets issue. It's also about potential trafficking in women. And you've given me your verdict on that, and we can talk about that in a second, what the odds are that they can pursue him for that. But maybe investigators were worried about this emergency move and shipping boxes, shipping things, were things getting tossed in the trash can or in a fire pit that they would like to comb through in the midst of an emergency move that the public wasn't anticipating until March.
Well, there's two things to be said. The first is that probably, the 12-bedroom house wasn't ready and only the 6-bedroom house was. Mm-hmm. But more seriously, the police could have then just obtained a search warrant from a magistrate and come and seized all his papers, as eventually they did after arresting him. They still didn't need to arrest him, That was really what I'd call grandstanding. It was a performance for the public and for the press. And then that incredible photo was released that's gone all over the world, with Andrew slumped on the back seat of the car taking him home, looking just poleaxed. It's all a bit performative. I'm not very happy with it. If he'd been my client, I would have been really.
You would have been tough.
I would have been complaining and protesting, even though you'd have got nowhere. But I would have been.
I quoted you a couple of times over the last few weeks because you did tell me off the record or just casually in a friendly way that you really felt like there were challenges when it comes to some of the sexual abuse, sex trafficking, those types of allegations, that, your number one issue was a lack of witnesses. But you also said, like, who is to say that a woman did not voluntarily come to Buckingham Palace to bed a prince? Who is to say that this woman, wasn't happy to meet Prince Andrew at the time? He was technically still a working royal. He technically still had a decent reputation. And you just said that there might be a difficult time actually pursuing some of the more aggressive charges against him, because it's not a Me Too moment. We don't have an army of women that are flooding the airwaves saying that this happened to me.
Well, that's right. No, it wasn't off the record. I'm very happy to repeat.
We're friends.
We're friends. Nothing's off the record. So let me repeat what I indeed said to you. And I said that contrary to what you're reading in the press, And all these silly articles, as they seem to me, I notice, are written by journalists, not lawyers. So the press is saying this misconduct in office charge will be really difficult and there's all kinds of problems. And heaven knows if the police will be able to prove it. But the sex charges, oh, yes, there he's in real trouble. I'm afraid that's not right at all to me as a professional lawyer who defends these people year in, year out. And I'm telling you that the sex charges are virtually impossible to prove, and I don't believe there will ever be a sex trial. Whereas the misconduct in public office charge is in deep trouble. That's the way it seems to me. Yeah, I'll explain that to you if you would like.
Yeah, let me just give you or give the audience, because you know what you're talking about, but let me give you as the audience some backstory here. According to Tom Sykes of the Daily Beast, Andrew may escape prosecution from those charges of sharing government secrets due to the vagueness of his trade role. And Tom Sykes says that sources say Andrew was not vetted, nor did he undergo any official assignment to the role. Basically, it was a vanity role, according to Sykes. No due diligence or vetting was carried out on Prince Andrew before he took up the position as UK trade envoy in 2001, despite his brother, then Prince Charles, warning his appointment would be a disaster and he would exploit it to pursue women and play golf. And you're saying that's irrelevant.
And Charles was right, wasn't he?
Yeah.
By the way. But yes, it is irrelevant. I'm going to have to give you a little bit of a law lecture. Would you forgive me?
No, I love it. I'm here for it.
Make it simple. Okay, so first, why are the sex charges never going to fly? Putting it very simply, because the main witness sadly killed herself, so she's not available. That's Virginia Giuffre. Secondly, because in England, the age of sexual consent is 16. And it appears she was 17 when the prince bedded her in London. So it's English law that applies. Whereas in Florida, the age of sexual consent, I believe, Florida, where I am talking to you from now, is 18. And therefore, she couldn't have given a valid consent to what happened, but in London, she could. So that's the first major reason why you can't charge him. Now, not only is it, of course, the case that many women would want to bed a prince, and it's impossible to prove that they wouldn't, especially when the main witness is no longer available. But secondly, of course, how shall I put this in a way that's not sounding cruel? But of course, many impressionable young girls might even be silly enough to imagine that they'd marry a prince, Cinderella. Who knows?
Right.
Who knows? You can't just assume that he raped this girl.
Right. But we should stress that he says he never even met Virginia. Now,
well, of course, he says he never even met her.
He can't sweat.
That's right. Right. The next question is, are sex trafficking charges going to fly? Cut a long story short, they changed the law here a few years after Andrew's encounter with these girls. In other words, I think from memory, in about 2014, they brought in a new statute concerning sex trafficking. That would have made it easier to prosecute him. Not easy, but easier. But the law as it was then, which is the law that applies to any charge now, the old law, frankly, I've read it up, take it from me, it's impossible. It's never going to fly to say that he trafficked this girl or indeed other girls into sex in a way that was against the law at the time. So that's the sex cases. Let me give you a little lecture on misconduct in public office. Now, this is what we call a common law offence. It's not a statute. It's judge-made law, common law, but it's been going for hundreds of years. And what it requires is this, that a person who's a public officer acting as such neglects to perform their duty or willfully misconducts themselves to such a degree as to amount to an abuse of the public's trust in the office holder without reasonable excuse or justification. That's a bit of a mouthful, but it was simply stated by a great Lord Chief Justice, Lord Mansfield, in the 18th century. He's a very important man because he was the first judge to free the slaves in England, actually, was Lord Mansfield. Famous case called Somerset's case. Somerset was the name of the runaway slave who fled a ship and in some English port, and he was captured, and Lord Mansfield freed him in a very famous and great judgment that really inspired, you might say, the American Civil War many years later, and Abraham Lincoln. But the end of the judgment was, let the black man go free.
Yeah.
You wouldn't get that today. But anyway, so Lord Mansfield said, if you're in an office of trust concerning the public and you abuse that trust, you're guilty of this offence. Now, Andrew was called the Special Representative for International Trade and Investment. And of course, his brother, Edward, had had the job previously for 2 years. I don't know if you know that. And they were the only two who had the job. They abolished it after Andrew had to resign in about 2011. After about 10 years in that job, he had to resign because of the Epstein scandal, of course. Now, the point is, you don't have to be paid to commit the offence, because there's cases where people who were in these public offices voluntarily, they were found guilty. You don't have to be vetted. Why should you be? He's a member of the royal family. Everybody trusted that, you could rely on a man like that, how wrong they were.
Right.
You don't have to be, there doesn't have to be a seal and a royal warrant and a sort of a beautiful letter appointing you. No, none of these things apply. And people who've been convicted of this offence, and I've had cases where policemen have been convicted. There's cases where coroners, judges, magistrates, registrars have been convicted. Police community support officers, probation officers, immigration officers, all sorts of elected officials, civil servants, prison staff, army officers. There was even a bishop of the Church of England, God help us, volunteer members of an independent monitoring board, market inspectors. All these kinds of people have been convicted. And it seems to me that many a judge, although there's no specific case on whether the Special Representative for International Trade and Investment is an office holder, but it does seem to me, having considered the other cases and what the judges said in those cases, and having considered all the trappings of this office and how he flew first class all over the world,
Yeah.
And with the finest hotels and the finest food and all his staff and all his
And
fun.
paid and the government paid for his
Oh,
massages all over the
the
place.
government paid for even for his massages, and he would take his massage table with him wherever he went. It's now emerged. So, many a judge would say that is an office holder. And from then on, it's up to a jury to decide whether he abused the public's trust. And I don't think it would take them long on what we know so far. So he's in big trouble. Now, it's true, this point of law, was he an office holder so as to be within the definition of misconduct in public office? I've no doubt that will go all the way to the Supreme Court. But what I'm saying is there's an excellent chance they will say, yes, he was. So I don't understand why the journalists are getting so worried about it and saying it's so difficult. It's not difficult at all. I mean, there's dozens of people who found themselves convicted and imprisoned for this offence, no trouble at all, including, I may say, a client of mine.
Do you, in reading what you just read in that description, do you think Peter Mandelson should be, or it sounds like you're confident about Andrew. Are you as confident about Peter Mandelson after reading that description?
Oh, I'm far more confident about Mandelson.
Really? Yeah. Why?
Mandelson was a British ambassador. I mean,
Yeah,
there you did have beautiful letters with seals on them,
that's
creating
very
his.
true.
Whereas in Andrew's case, it was more informal. But that doesn't matter. Informal is not a bar. It may make it a bit more difficult to say he's an office holder, but this is up to the judge and then the Court of Appeal. So one can be far more confident that Lord Mandelson doesn't even have the defence to start with. Andrew has the point of law defence that he'll run all the way, and it's an interesting point of law. It's arguable. You could say it's a grey area in that there hasn't been a case, since there's only been two people who've held this office. There hasn't been a case to say that it is a public office, but equally there hasn't been a case to say that it isn't. And given the climate at the moment towards Andrew, you see, let's just consider this point as well. You know that whenever you see a picture of the goddess of justice, for example, who's at the top of the Old Bailey, the criminal court in Britain. So this lady is holding a scales of justice in one hand, isn't she? And a sword in the other hand, the sword of justice. And usually she's blindfolded to show that she doesn't look to left or to right. She's completely impartial. But trust me, after a long career, I can tell you, the blindfold is made of the thinnest gauze, and the judges peep through it. And the judges are very well aware of public sentiment and the feelings of the British people. And the feelings of the British people are so anti-Andrew. And there's such a feeling he let the side down. He let the royal family down as badly as he let the British public down. He's a bounder. He's a rotter. He's corrupt. He's entitled. He's greedy. There's such a tremendous feeling in that direction that, let me simply say, I think he's in big trouble for this offense.
He's in big trouble and he's broke and can't afford the type that he can't afford somebody like you. And he needs somebody like you right now. Can we let's go full circle here, because I want to ask you back to the Clintons, back to Pam Bondi. We didn't get much out of the Clintons, to your point. It was a masterclass in how to deal with a situation like this. We learned absolutely nothing new. Is Pam Bondi a waste of time? Or do you think we might get any new information that might inch us closer to some form of truth? And do you think there will be any American public figures that have to face any sort of consequences for their relationship with Jeffrey Epstein? I mean, aside from Bill Gates, who has to admit to cheating on his wife with Russian women and ultimately losing his wife.
And apparently getting a nasty case of a sexually transmitted disease.
I know.
If you can believe Epstein's emails about it.
Which we should say Bill Gates denies. We should admit that Bill Gates denies that, but yes.
And perhaps that's more information than we need anyway.
Yeah.
However, well, you're asking me to speculate, which the two Clintons kept refusing to do.
Right. Very good point.
When they were answering questions. But
what could Pam Bondi know that would be of value to us?
Well, exactly. Let's not forget that there's 50,000 pages we know that are coming any day now.
Right.
Because she's agreed to release a further 50,000 pages. And I suspect that we may find this is the gift that keeps on giving, because I suspect that if they've been held back, we're going to find it's even more exciting than what they've let us see so far. I suspect so. I may be wrong.
Yeah.
So we may be talking again next week, and we'll be jumping up and down on our seats, Kinsey. But Pam Bondi is obviously not able to give evidence about the facts of the Epstein case. All she can say is why it's taken a long time and why the papers have been released in tranches rather than all in one dump, and whether there's more stuff to come and so on, and why there's been all these redactions. So she's going to have some kind of a story, isn't she? I don't know, the office photocopier broke down, or somebody spilt coffee on the machine and it wasn't working, or there's going to be some story to justify why it's taken so long to release. But there's not going to be anything about the actual facts of the Epstein case, I would guess.
Okay.
So it's probably going to be quite dull, and at the end of the day, people will still be saying, oh, she was just protecting Donald Trump. And other people will say, well, everything that's emerged, there isn't a single thing that directly implicates Trump, which is the case so far, of course, that nothing directly implicates Trump so far, not nearly as much as, for example, Bill Clinton. There's none of the similar kind of stuff so far, anyway.
Wait,
So I,
before we wrap up, I do want to ask you what your reaction is to watching Trump and Clinton defend each other about this ordeal, because these are two well-known enemies that they didn't really become enemies till the 2016 election cycle kicked off, but they don't ever really say nice things about each other. And in this case, we have watched them fiercely defend each other. And Bill said in his testimony, it's my understanding there was a falling out because of a real estate deal gone bad, and he hasn't associated with him since his conviction. And there's Bill Clinton giving Donald Trump this alibi, basically, or this, defense that no one really saw coming.
well, it's really very ironic, I think. I don't know, we have the expression, do you have it in the States? Frenemies. They're not
Yeah.
actually such enemies, they're frenemies. And we have another proverb, birds of a feather flock together.
Yep.
So I suspect that this is the reason, they have more unites them than separates them, is my suspicion. And we remember what Trump wrote in the infamous 50th birthday book, what a wonderful guy Epstein was, and he likes young women almost as much as I do. Words
Oh,
to that effect.
oh,
Do you
gross.
remember? They
Yeah.
tend to be on the younger side.
Mm,
Well, I think Trump was actually a bachelor at the time, but even so.
yeah.
So, yeah, you can take an easy guess at why they're supporting each other now.
Any other thoughts before we wrap up on what we've seen so far?
Yeah, there's this that I don't know if you've seen. Well, you do all your homework, Kinsey, so you probably have. But there's a fascinating interview that's just hit YouTube. And again, it comes from the latest dump. And it's the rough tapes, because it never got published, it never got polished up, of Steve Bannon interviewing Epstein. Um, After his first brush with the law in Palm Beach in 2008, but before his second arrest. I think the date is about 2016. So it's 2 hours or more. It is the most spellbinding and fascinating interview, and I really advise our viewers to go online and catch it, because my impression of it was this. Firstly, Epstein is brilliant. I hadn't seen anything that made me realize that before, but when you watch this interview, the guy is a financial genius. And Bannon keeps explaining why he's a financial genius, because he understood the way the world financial system works, and actually how the whole thing is one big Ponzi scheme. They
Yeah.
go into it in some detail. It could collapse any minute. The whole economy of the Western world is one great Ponzi scheme, actually, starting with the way a bank takes in $1 and lends nine. And
Yeah.
if God forbid everyone asks for their $9 back, the whole bank goes bump, and yet in a sort of bubble, this goes on the whole time. And this was explained very well, and far more. But he was brilliant. He comes over so controlled, so fluent, so articulate, so charming. Could charm the birds off the trees, I
Yeah.
thought. Um, and Bannon clearly has the most enormous respect for him, and he explains why in this interview. He's one of the very few men, says Bannon, who actually understand how the world financial system works. So, whereas before seeing this, and indeed you and I have discussed this in a previous one of your previous programs, that whereas before I saw this, I had thought he was probably the unexplained 600 million he made and left in his will. I thought probably he was somehow getting it by blackmailing all these famous people with the sexual compromising material he had on them. But I don't think that now. I think
Wow.
what he was doing was getting insider information from people like Mandelson, from people like Andrew, and probably a dozen and dozens, scores perhaps, of other people who haven't yet emerged, and some we may never find out, who were also giving him financial information from the inside in exchange probably for sexual favors. But I think that's how he was making his money, a grand scheme of insider trading. Anyway, it's compulsive viewing. And you also see that he was quite a philanthropist. He gave an enormous amount to universities, including Harvard, for scientific research, an enormous amount. And then,
Well,
of
you
course,
got to cover up your naughty behavior somehow.
well, not only that, but for example, he used to hold small scientific conferences with the most important scientists in the world on his little island. And that's the background to that distasteful photo that has emerged of the great, now dead scientist Stephen Hawking, who had motor neurone disease and yet was one of the world's great thinkers and scientists.
Mm-hmm.
And there he is on a deck chair, and next to him on each side, holding drinks and feeding him the cocktails, apparently there are two very well endowed young ladies
Which
who've
his family say were his caregivers. To be
well,
fair, his family says those were his
yes, I'm sure
nurses.
that their faces are blocked out, but he certainly had caregivers with very fine bodies,
Curvy caregivers. We call those curvy caregivers.
very curvy young caregivers. Anyway, it's good to think that he got some pleasure in life, but this is taken at one of Epstein's high-level scientific conferences. So
Yeah.
this man was a man of many parts, you know. He's not just black and white.
Right. Yeah. I mean, clearly very clever when it came to how to put those different puzzle pieces together. And you are who you associate with. So if he could associate with former presidents, if it required a quick trip on his private jet, he could brag about that next week to the next person he was trying to impress and get in front of and, establish a relationship with. He was very much a social climber.
And let's remember that one of the things that has just emerged was that he made 17 private visits to the Clinton White House. 17 private visits. And we know, of course, how many private visits he made to Balmoral and Windsor Castle and Buckingham Palace, and all the photos of him on the throne with Ghislaine and so on and so forth,
Mm-hmm.
and private visits by Andrew. So this guy got everywhere, and everybody was very happy to be his friend until it all went wrong in
And yeah,
Palm
until they weren't, until
they
you
weren't.
are who you associate with becomes um, a pedophile, which will,
Yeah.
unfortunately, that's the word we'll use here.
Yes.
Well, I feel like there's so much more that we're going to be able to discuss next time now that we know we've got thousands of pages being released within the next few days. Overruled. Jonathan Goldberg, KC, you're the smartest person I know. Thanks so much for spending time with me today. And for the audience, we're new. Make sure you subscribe. Make sure you like. Make sure you give us a beautiful review. 5 stars. We'll take the 5-star review, please. And follow us next week for more on this case and other compelling cases that are happening all over the world. This is Overruled. Thanks, everyone.